I started racing this car in 2014, and it's got a ton of hours on it. The tires, especially the rear tires, they're worn down. It's time for a new set. And this car was made long before any components came along for cycle karts like the ones that Vintage Kart Co. is building. So everything is go-kart components, plus the rims are all out of the wrecking yard, salvage rims. So I'm going to do some upgrades, and I have a list I made up. Let me show you what my plans are. This is what I'd like to accomplish. I'd like to install some new spindles, some new rear hubs, and 4 new rims. These all kind of go well together. The front end is so sloppy on my car because it's all go-kart components that I want to switch over to the Vintage Kart Co. items. So new spindles, new rear hubs, and 4 new rims. Then I want to put in a differential, which will also require the hydraulic brakes, which will be a nice upgrade. And then I'd like to give it a fresh paint job and put the wheel discs back on it. So I'm going to take the car completely apart because I'll have to modify the engine plate, the whole area for this differential. Alright, I'm looking forward to this. I figure it'll take me about a month to do all this work. I think the first thing I want to accomplish is to replace the spindles. These are, well, the only set, this is a prototype set that Vintage Kart Co. made up. Some guys have been asking Jack if they had a spindle that would fit in the go-kart C-bracket, you know, the spindle bracket. And so they made these up. As it turns out, the Monocar is a bracket from a go-kart, and this is a direct replacement. It'll fit inside there. But upon closer inspection, this bracket is considerably larger and more stout, which is what we want for a cycle cart. But it gets in the way of the turning radius. I'll show you that in a minute, but I think we can work our way around it. Let's see, I want to get this axle off of here, and then I'll show you how these will go together. Okay, I have the axle on the bench here, and the whole reason for putting a new spindle in is because, see that inherent slop right there? It's just part of the nature of go-kart components. They're just not finely machined. So, plus this will accept the brand new Kart Co. rims, which I want to use. And you can see how these are very similar. It's just this is much more stout. Alright, I'm going to take these apart. And then there's some bushings I had put in here a while back. I'm going to put some new bushings in there. And then these are bushed already. See, the go-kart spindles do not have bushings here. Okay. So the whole idea concerning an improved spindle is that A, it's just heavier built to handle the stresses, and B, that it has a long enough axle for the new rims, and C, that it's bushed here. Okay, so 3-4 years ago, when I was putting this together and I was working with these sloppy parts, I went and bought some bronze bushings, and because I have a mill, I was able to open these up, slip the bushing in, then open these up, put a bushing in. So now technology is basically caught up and we have a spindle that has bushings. So now the challenge is just to get it to fit and to work right. Of course, I'll get a new kingpin, and I want the kingpin long enough that the threads do not make contact with the bracket. Okay. Here you can see threads embossed into the bushing, which has split. So these threads have worn the bushing down. So I don't want that to happen on this new setup. So this is looking pretty good. You can see how there's enough allowance in this new spindle for new bushings to actually fit in here like this. One top and one bottom. Yeah, that's going to work out pretty good. So I have to go get some new bushings. You can see how lots of hours on this car just wore through these. And that's from the kingpin. All that is from the fact that this kingpin rotates, and these threads are down here, and they just make a mess of things. They're the reason this failed. I'm in the process of removing the paint using the 80 grit on the DA, and it's working pretty good. It's coming off pretty quick. So part of my master plan was to upgrade the spindles on this axle so that I could use the vintage Cartco rims. And I wanted to get away from the fact that all 4 of the rims on the Monocar are salvage rims. They're 45-year-old rims I got out of the wrecking yard. But one little minor difference that not everybody knows about, and that is the bore where the bearing goes is different on these new rims versus the old salvage rims. This is 37 millimeters and this is 35 millimeters. So the challenge isn't to find the right millimeter, it's to find the inner bore correct. This is 37 with a 3/4 bore. Actually, it's just a 2 or 3 thousandths bigger than 3/4, so it's just a hair sloppy. So this is old technology, old rim, 37 millimeter bearing with a 3/4 shaft. Okay, so the new technology is the new vintage Cartco rims with a 35 millimeter bearing, which shows up on these spindles right here, with a 5/8 ID, 35 millimeter OD. So that allows me to use these new rims. Problem is, these new prototypes, these are 3/4 axles. These are designed for the guys that are using the older rims but want to upgrade their spindles and get away from the go-kart. So, what does that mean? Well, you can't use this. The old one goes away. Get rid of those. I have the new kingpins, I can still use those, but I have to use this spindle, which is okay, it's just a little more work. I have to cut this off and fashion a new bracket, similar to what I did on the BMW. So it's going to take me just a little bit longer to get this rebuilt, but at least I have a way to get it done. Alright. Using the file, I cleaned up the holes here, and then these bushings went in pretty good. I tapped them into place. I have to cut them off, clean them up. So now I've determined that I'm going to cut this spindle at 2 1/8. I allowed for the thickness of the flange, which is 1/4 inch, and that should be just about right. And maybe I'll have to dress these a little bit to get it to fit just right. Alright, so I'm going to run this through the metal cutting bandsaw. Using the metal cutting bandsaw, it's doing a pretty nice job of getting through this spindle. It's sitting nice and flat on this tube, so that it's easy to hold on to. It's going to be a nice cut. Okay. Alright, this is working as I hoped it would. This is just slightly larger so I can dress these surfaces with the file until it fits real nice. Okay, get this side done and move to the other. So I have this 5/8 drill bit that I run through the bushings on the axle and on the spindle. So here's how this all goes together. I cut these to length, filed them so they're nice and smooth. So you slip in the and you'll notice that the threads are beyond the bracket. So this spacer and then this nut will fit on there. So that should hold up pretty good for a while. Eventually it wears out and you just put in new bushings. Alright, I still have to make this bracket. Make sure I have the turning radius. So far so good. Let's work on the other side. I'm pleased with the progress here. With these bushings here, there's no slop at all in this spindle. It's nice. So I'll probably cut this bracket off. I don't know, I'm still thinking about it. But it's going to be the same height and length as the go-kart version because I get a good turning radius with that. It'd be the same as this bracket here. Okay. Let's get to work on those brackets. I've been whittling away here on some poster board, coming up with a bracket pattern. So I'm trying to get the same height, and you notice this hole is centered over the spindle kingpin basically. So that's the idea here. Alright, I'll weld it up out of a couple pieces. See how it looks. So I made a pattern that requires 2 pieces to make these little spindle bracket arms. So now I just welded on the first piece. I'll clean that up and then I can fit the second part of the pattern. Now I'm ready for this piece, which I'm going to fabricate next, and then I'll weld it on. And I'm comparing it to the go-kart spindle. This is the vintage Cartco. Notice this angle. This is the Ackerman angle or geometry for steering. They build some of that into their spindles. Of course, the go-kart spindles don't have any Ackerman geometry. You could Google that if you wanted to. A-C-K-E-R-M-A-N-N, Ackerman. Okay, let's get this thing made, welded up. Well, if you stick with something long enough, you can usually work it out. I've made a couple different patterns, but I think I have it figured out. I'm down to welding on these 2 tabs. This should be a nice stout spindle when it's done. Magnets are just barely holding it together. So this is a 3/8 hole because I'm upgrading to 3/8 tie rods, 3/8 rod ends, 3/8 bolts. And so I'm going to have to make a new steering shaft so I can weld the pitman arms in the correct place and the right width for the larger rod ends. Alright, I'm looking forward to getting these done. So time to weld them up. Okay, I finished the welding. They're hotter than hell right now. But got it all the way around. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Alright, now I can put it together. So the first item on the list, install new spindles. is done. Now this is the old tie rod, the old 5/16. It's just holding the axle up. And I'm real happy with the way this came together. Okay. Alright, I got to work on the tie rods and the steering shaft. So I have to remove this sheet metal. That's what I'm going to do next. Onward to the next upgrade, which would be the 3/8 tie rods and this upgraded steering shaft. So I have to remove it. Got the sheet metal off of here so I can easily get to this and pull it out. And I have to make a new one, and I'll show you all about that here directly. I have the steering shaft out now, and here's the new one. And I'm making a new one because these rod ends are 3/8. These are 5/16. And so this width right here between these pitman arms is different. So it won't be too hard to recreate this. I'm going to cut this off and reuse this bracket and this bracket, and then I have bushings here and here, and I'll put in new bushings, and then I have to weld on this new end here. Okay, this shouldn't take too long. Okay, I have the pitman arm welded, and it's pointing straight down, and I made sure to center up the steering wheel. The center rib is centered so that everything lines up later. I have a little bit of a mess going on here, but I am making progress. I have the steering shaft reinstalled, the new version, with the larger tie rod ends. Yep, I'm happy with the installation. Alright, so I have some 3/8 rod, and I'm going to cut my own threads on it so I can get it just the right length I want. But I have to mock up this axle, get it in location so I can get the length correct on the tire. It took me a few minutes, but I managed to center the axle side to side and center of the spring this way. And then I have this magnetic angle finder. I have it set at about 8 degrees, maybe 9 degrees of caster. Yeah, this looks pretty good. Okay. I have some 3/8 rod, quite a bit more stout than the original 5/16. Alright, so I square up the end, then I put a little bevel, and then I start turning some threads. Okay, that little bevel that I put on the 3/8 rod allows me to get the die started. I also have some cutting oil designed specifically for hand threading applications, and it works real well. I've used 3-in-1 oil before, but this is really better. So I just dab a little bit on the rod and the die. So I've already got a few turns there, but basically I turn about one turn, then I back it off and break the chip, as they call it. Kind of cleans the thread as I go. I'm not going too fast here, I'm just taking my time. So far so good. Yep, I much prefer making my own tie rods, threading them. That's a 3/8 24 fine thread, a grade 8 jam nut, and then the rod end. And with it run all the way in, there's just a little bit of thread. That's the kind of thing I like. You can control this type of, the exact length. Because sometimes, you know, only a little bit of the thread will be catching the rod end, maybe a 1/4 of an inch, and that always bothered me. So at least now I know there's a full inch of thread inside the rod end. Okay, that's a nice upgrade right there. Okay, I finally finished upgrading the spindles and the tie rods. Everything's working nice and smooth. I have excellent turning radius. I like that the 3/8 rod is just much more stout than the 5/16. I've made relief cuts to allow for suspension travel. Yep. Definitely better than what I had before. Alright. Okay, I have everything put together on the front. It's all back together now. Nice tight. I adjusted the alignment, a little bit of toe in, and I'm going to take it for a spin here. I'm looking forward to seeing how it feels all nice and tight. It was seriously sloppy previously, so let's see how she does. it makes having those new spindles and the new tie rods just nice and tight. Really a lot of fun to drive. Alright, so that'll be the end of this video, and on the next one we're going to work on installing the differential. So the rebuilding continues. Thanks for watching, everybody.